In the distant years of Castella, where the glitter of gold overshadowed justice and the power of the throne crushed the human soul, lived Noah. He was a spectre in the shadows of the palace, a slave without a voice, without a past of his own, and not even a name to distinguish him from others. His routine was an eternal silent lament, sweeping the corridors where the nobility in their silks and brocades passed without even noticing his existence. Life around him was a stage of opulence and intrigue, a world where the humanity of some was the foundation for the glory of others, and Noah was just another invisible piece in this intricate chessboard. On the other side of the abysmal social divide, at the pinnacle of power, stood Queen Isabela. Her beauty was a legend in the salons, but her existence was an echoing void. A prisoner of a passionless marriage to a cold and distant king, she lived in a luxury that suffocated her soul. Revered for the crown she wore, she was, paradoxically, nullified in her essence as a woman. The days were wasted in ceremonies and obligations, and each dawn brought the same desolation, the same longing for something real, for a touch of life that was not bathed in gold and protocols. It was on a grey morning, a day that promised to be like so many others, that fate, or perhaps a whim of the gods, hatched its plan. Noah, bent over the cold stone of the corridor to the royal chambers, diligently scrubbed at a stubborn stain, his eyes lowered, his mind empty of hope or desire. Isabela, in turn, emerged from her chambers, her face pale and her eyes clouded with insomnia and disillusionment. In a fleeting instant, a clumsy movement by Noah caused a small jug of water to slip from his hands. The sound of the glass breaking echoed in the silence, and his eyes, in a reflection of despair and fear, raised. It was at that moment that their gazes met. What followed was not just a meeting of eyes, but a clash of worlds, a spark in a powder keg. Noah's gaze, filled with an instinctive fear of the punishment that awaited him, met Isabela's, which expressed not anger or contempt, but an almost palpable hunger. It was not a hunger for bread or gold, but for something real, something that vibrated with life in the midst of her anesthetized existence. In that millisecond, time seemed to bend, and a silent and powerful connection, a forbidden and uncontrollable desire, blossomed in the interstice between the slave's submission and the queen's melancholy. From that day on, a dangerous game of glances and silences took hold in the palace. Isabela, with a boldness she herself did not know she possessed, began to seek out the paths that Noah walked, with the excuse of inspecting the areas he had cleaned. Each encounter was a furtive ballet, a touch of shoulders as they passed, a whispered word about the beauty of a flower that Noah was caring for in the inner gardens, a fleeting smile that disappeared as soon as the figure of a guard appeared. Noah's heart beat like a war drum in his chest, paralyzed by the terror of being discovered, but at the same time magnetized by the queen's inexplicable attraction. He knew that the fate of anyone who dared to touch what belonged to the king was the most brutal death, and yet he could not pull away. Isabela, for her part, felt a growing urgency. Life in her gilded captivity seemed unbearable without those small, dangerous moments. Desire, once a whisper, became a clamor within her. She sought him with a fervor that astonished even herself, risking everything for a glimpse, for an exchange of glances that spoke of entire worlds. The passion between them was like an ember hidden beneath the ashes, ready to consume everything. And when, on a sultry moonlit night beneath the shadow of the castle battlements, their bodies finally met in a clandestine embrace, the world around them seemed to disappear. In that instant, the barriers of king and slave, in power and servitude, were annihilated, and they crossed the thin line that separated love from crime, life from death. The intense and overwhelming passion transformed them both in ways they could never have foreseen. For Noé, every touch from Isabela was a revelation, a balm for the wounds of a lifetime of invisibility. He, the man without a voice, found in her eyes a mirror of his own soul, an acknowledgement of his existence. Isabela in turn blossomed under the forbidden affection, her pale face gaining color, and her smiles, previously forced, now born of a genuine and dangerous joy. However, this metamorphosis would exact a price, one that the court of Castella would never forgive. Nature does not wait for royal permission or blessings to follow its course, and before long, a secret began to blossom in the queen's womb, a secret that could not be hidden for long. The discovery of Isabela's pregnancy fell upon them like a bolt from the blue. A child, the fruit of a love that defied all laws and hierarchies, would be living proof of betrayal, an indelible stain on the purest royal blood. The baby's skin, the color of its eyes, every feature would be a silent testimony of its forbidden origin. Fear, which had previously been a shadow, became a suffocating presence. The lives of the queen, the slave, and even the unborn child hung by a thread. Death was the only sentence for such an affront, and the image of the king's executioners, with their sharp blades, haunted their dreams. Hope seemed to have abandoned their hearts, but love, even in the face of the abyss, would prove to be a more powerful force than despair. Desperate, but driven by their unconditional love for each other, and now, for the small life that was growing, Isabela and Noé made a risky decision: to flee. It was madness, a defiance of the king's omnipotence and of death itself. But the alternative was the loss of everything. In these moments of extreme distress, Providence appeared in the figure of Catalina, an old palace servant whose calloused hands had cleaned countless royal robes and whose eyes had witnessed more secrets than the stones of the castle itself. Catalina, who had once lost her own daughter to the relentless horrors of the court, felt a deep sorrow for the queen and the young slave. Isabela's suffering and the innocence of the life that was to come awakened in her a latent courage, a chance for redemption from her own past of loss. Catalina knew the palace like the back of her hand, its hiding places, its secret passages, the guards' shifts and its blind spots. She planned her escape for the night of the kingdom's great festival, when the court would be distracted by celebrations, music and wine. The atmosphere that night was a stifling mix of forced joy and palpable tension. Dressed in simple clothes, almost unrecognizable amid the crowd, Isabela and Noé followed Catalina through labyrinths of dark corridors, forgotten staircases, and underground passages that no one else seemed to remember. Every creak, every shadow seemed a harbinger of discovery. The air smelled of fear, hope, and the promise of the unknown. The escape was tense, a silent ballet between life and death, where every step was a risk, and the future an abyss of uncertainty. The escape was a test of nerves, their hearts pounding wildly, their ears straining for any sound that might betray their presence. The dusty, musty smell of the secret passages mingled with the cold, sweat that trickled down Noé and Isabela's foreheads. At every turn, every shadow, Catalina's slender figure moved with the agility of an elderly panther, guiding them with a certainty that only deep knowledge and selfless love could provide. They emerged near the stables, where the hubbub of the festival drowned out the sound of their hurried footsteps. There, a horse awaited them, saddled and stocked, a final act of Catalina's loyalty. But fate, treacherous as ever, decided to show its cruel face at that moment. A flash of torchlight revealed the fleeing figures to one of the guards, who happened to be further away from the revelry. The cry of warning echoed in the courtyard. Without hesitation, Catalina, with the dignity of a queen and the courage of a lioness, turned to face her pursuers. "Go!" she whispered, her voice choked but firm as she advanced to confront the guards. She knew that this was her sacrifice, the last act of a life marked by loss. Her capture was the guarantee of their freedom, a precious moment that would allow them to disappear into the vastness of the night. Noé's heart sank, but Isabella's urgent gaze urged him on, the horse already galloping away, Catalina's figure diminishing in the darkness. The flight stretched on into the night, the sound of the horse's hooves muffled by the distance and the oppressive silence of the fields. Isabela, clinging to Noah, felt the wind whip her face, taking with it the remnants of the life she was leaving behind. The castle, once their home and their prison, was now nothing more than a dark spot on the horizon, swallowed up by darkness. The fear of persecution drove them on, but with each gallop, the hope of a new life, however uncertain, lit up in their hearts. They did not know where to go, only that they needed to go far from the reach of the crown, to a place where origin was not a shackle and love was not a crime. Their journey took them along back roads and forgotten trails, far from prying eyes and royal patrols. Dawn found them exhausted but determined. Finally, after days of tireless travel, they came upon a small seaside village. The air there was salty and humid. The smell of fish and sea air filled their lungs. It was a vibrant place, with colorful houses and fishing boats bobbing gently on the calm waters. Here, the hierarchies of Castella seemed distant, dissolved by the vastness of the ocean. Noah felt a strange sense of relief, as if the invisible bonds of his slavery were being loosened by the sea breeze. It was a new world, where love between races was not a scandal, but simply love, accepted and lived without judgment. In that seaside village, Isabela abandoned the name that imprisoned her and the crown that suffocated her. She would become Aina, an ordinary woman, with her hands in the mud and her feet in the sand. Noah, in turn, shed the invisible shackles of his existence as a slave. He was now simply a man, free to breathe the salty air and gaze at the horizon without fear. They found refuge and kindness in the figure of a widow with serene eyes and a welcoming smile, whose simple but lively house offered them a new home. She welcomed them without questions, perhaps because she saw in their eyes the weariness of a long journey and the promise of pure love. A faithful fisherman, his face scarred by the sun and the storms of the sea, also reached out, teaching Noah the secrets of the tides and the art of fishing. For the first time, Noah felt the weight of a hook in his hands, not that of chains. Hannah learned to weave nets and deal with the strong smell of fish, exchanging brocades for simple linens that gave her a freedom she had never felt before. Life there was hard but true, forged in work and simplicity, yet the fear of the past was a persistent shadow, a mist that hung over her days, even under the bright sunshine of this new beginning. Nights were still haunted by nightmares of torches and guards, and the distant sound of a bell brought with it the echo of the palace bells. The threat from the past would inevitably reappear. The king, wounded in his pride and tormented by betrayal, would not rest until he found them. News of the escape had spread like wildfire throughout Castella, although the details were distorted and disguised to preserve the image of the crown. So it was that Ramiro, a former soldier of the king, with a face hardened by battle and a soul marked by loyalties, was sent in pursuit. Ramiro was known for his tenacity and for following orders with the coldness of a blade. He reached the seaside village, following tracks that few others would be able to decipher, the court map in his hands and the determination of the hunt in his heart. However, upon seeing them, something in Ramiro changed. He watched them from a distance, Anna and Noé sitting on the sand, the once majestic queen now barefoot, with her hair loose, laughing at something that Noé, with his calloused hands, was telling her. There was no luxury, there was no pomp, just the simplicity of a pure love and the promise of a life that was born of his choices. Ramiro, a man of few words and many burdens, saw in them the reflection of a past that haunted him. He himself had loved a slave years before, a love he had never dared to fight for. The image of that woman, whose fate had been sealed by her cowardice, appeared in his mind like a ghost. The scene before his eyes, the simple happiness of Anna and Noé, was a mirror of the life he had not had the courage to live. At that crucial moment, Ramiro's loyalty to the king vanished like sand through his fingers. The sight of Anna and Noé, so vulnerable and yet so full of love, rekindled in him a spark of humanity that he had long thought extinguished. His hunting mission became an act of salvation, a chance for redemption for his own tormented soul. He, who had been the implacable arm of the crown, decided to break his blood oath, defying the power of Castella in the name of something greater, the life and happiness of those who ironically showed him the path he had not had the courage to follow. Ramiro approached them not as a tormentor, but as an unexpected ally. In his eyes, Noé and Anna saw not the coldness of a royal soldier, but the pain of a man who understood the essence of their struggle. Without saying many words, he handed them a heavy sack of gold, provisions for the journey, and a new, hastily sketched map pointing inland to a place so isolated that not even the king's most discerning spies could track it. "Go," he said, his voice hoarse, "and live the life I could not. May the wind carry your footprints, and the sea keep your secret." It was the absolution of a man who, in saving them, was trying to save himself as well. That encounter, so full of tension and danger, culminated in an act of mercy that would seal the fate of all. With their hearts still racing with Ramiro's providence, Noé and Anna followed the new map, venturing into the depths of the country, far from the known paths and the eyes of the kingdom. The journey was long and arduous, through forgotten mountains and valleys where the untamed nature seemed to hold its own secrets. With each passing day, Anna's belly grew, and with it, the urgency to find a safe haven, a place where the life she carried could come to light without the stigma of the past. The nights were cold and provisions dwindled, but with each step, the hope of a free future warmed their hearts. Finally, after weeks of traveling, they spotted a small village nestled among the mountains, surrounded by dense forest and a crystal-clear river. It was San Martín del Norte, a place so isolated that it seemed to have stopped in time, untouched by the intrigues and tyranny of distant kingdoms. There the people lived off the land and the river, their faces marked by the sun and work, but their eyes with a kindness that Anna and Noé had not seen for a long time. It was in this hidden refuge that they decided to build a new life, far from the shadows of the past. The huts were made of wood and stone, and the smell of fireplace smoke hung in the air, mixed with the freshness of the forest. It was a place to start over, to simply be human. It was in San Martín del Norte, under the simple roof of a hut made with their own hands, that Anna and Noé's son was born. The birth was difficult, but the joy that filled the small home with the baby's first cry eclipsed all the pain and fear that had haunted them. They named him Elias, in honor of the festival that had marked the beginning of their escape and the rebirth of their lives. Elias grew up free, without the bonds of caste or the shadow of a throne. His eyes, which shone with curiosity about the world, saw only love in his parents, not the queen and slave they had once been. That village, with its guardian mountains and its simple people, offered them the peace they would never have found in the opulent chambers of Castella. Noah, with his hands that once dusted the halls, now shaped iron in the small village forge, teaching his son the secrets of metallurgy, the strength and malleability of steel. Elias learned to strike the hammer with precision, to feel the heat of the fire, and to transform raw materials into useful tools, an honest job that brought dignity. Anna, in turn, shared with her son the art of words, teaching him to read and write, the magic of books and the richness of stories that were hidden between the lines. She told him tales of distant worlds, not those of the court, but those of imagination, courage, and love. Elias was the living symbol of a new world where people were judged by their hearts and character, not by their origins or the name they bore. His existence was proof that love, when true, could transcend any barriers imposed by men. Time passed in San Martín del Norte, with the seasons passing peacefully, and the past, which had once been a constant threat, became a distant memory, diluted by the new landscapes and the simple routine. The mountains served as silent guardians, and the vastness of the forest like a protective mantle. The king, in his distant palace, succumbed to madness, his mind corroded by the loss of his queen and the betrayal he never understood. The kingdom, in order to silence the scandal and preserve the image of the crown, preferred to erase Isabela's name from its records, weaving an official narrative of her death and keeping the incident in sepulchral silence. The power of Castella, so implacable, could not find those who did not want to be found, and the story of Anna and Noah became a legend, whispered only among the few who dared to remember. Isabela and Noé grew old in peace, their hair turning white, their faces furrowed with the marks of a full and, above all, free life. The hands that had once been chained or adorned with jewels were now the hands of artisans, of parents, of lovers who had built their own paradise. The nights in the village were filled with the sound of the stream and the song of the crickets, not with the echoes of court dances or the clink of swords. They saw in Elias the realization of their boldest dreams, living proof that love and courage could shape a different destiny, far from the shackles of a cruel world. The boy, who grew up to be a strong and wise man, set out one day, not on the run, but on a mission. He would teach others what his parents had taught him, that true wealth lies not in gold or titles, but in the purity of the heart and the freedom to be who one is. The certainty that the past would never find them took deep root in the souls of Anna and Noé. The fate of the king, driven mad by his own solitude and paranoia, was the clearest proof that justice sometimes manifests itself in mysterious and inevitable ways. The silence of the kingdom regarding the scandal was, for them, the greatest blessing, a smokescreen that guaranteed their safety and the peace of their new existence. In San Martín del Norte, the memory of Castella faded, replaced by the sounds of Noé's forge, Anna's songs as she wove, and Elias's steady steps as he explored the forest with the curiosity of a discoverer. Life there was not an escape, but a conscious choice, an act of resistance against a system that wanted them trapped. Anna and Noah not only grew old together, but they also matured in their love, which grew stronger and deeper with each passing year. The fiery passion of the early days gave way to a serene companionship, to a mutual understanding that translated into looks and gestures, into silences that said more than 1,000 words. Each dawn, when the sun tinged the mountains with gold, they saw themselves as the sole architects of their own destiny, the king and queen of their small and free kingdom. Elias, their son, was their most precious legacy, the materialization of a love that challenged the world and conquered it. His departure, one day, to teach others the values of that village, would be the extension of their own story, the seed of a new paradigm. Elias, the son of forbidden love, grew up with his soul forged in the mountains and his heart open to the world. He was not a prince of royal blood, but a king of virtue, a man who understood the value of freedom and the power of compassion. When age and the desire to spread the seed of his home drove him to leave, Anna and Noé felt the sweetness of melancholy, the joy of seeing his legacy flourish in a world that needed more kindness. He became a wanderer, a storyteller, sharing the teachings of San Martín del Norte, that people were judged by what they did, not by the name imposed on them, and that love, true love, was the only royal inheritance worth defending, the only treasure that death could not reap and kingdoms could not confiscate. Thus ends the chronicle of Noah and Isabela, the slave and the queen who dared to love. They lived their last days in peace, Beneath the vast sky and the sheltering mountains of San Martin del Norte, their true names known only to each other and to the son who was the fruit of their courage. The king of Castella, in his silent madness, never knew of the refuge that his hatred could not reach. Their story, a tale of love, sacrifice and redemption, was not written on royal parchments or sung by court bards, but engraved on the stones of the village, in the whisper of the wind in the mountains, and in the hearts of those who heard the truth about the love that transcends thrones and chains. And although the narrator, or the characters themselves, may not have understood the immensity of what they had lived through, the life they built together, and the freedom they won, were the purest form of resolution.